Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Though a bird can't fly, that doesn't mean it never will. By Phalanx. What might have been if Kuina had survived her fall down the dojo stairs? She and Zoro strive to become the greatest swordsman in the world, allegiances and promises notwithstanding. Adios.
Out in the execution ground, the sun shone down scorchingly. It was that time of the day when, right after the midday meal, citizens of Shelltown would push aside their emptied plates and retire for an hour's repose to escape from the heat. But out in the execution ground of the Marine base, such creature comforts were but a dream to a miserable figure currently tied at the stake. It had been 7 days since the incident at the inn where the so-called pirate hunter, Roronoa Zoro, had tangled with authority for the sake of a little girl named Rika. As his bad luck would have it, authority came in the form of Helmeppo, the snotty, spoiled son of Captain Morgan, who, even more unfortunately, had the town in a grip of iron. In the end, he had been coerced into making a pact with Helmeppo. If he survived for the month at stake, he'd get off scot-free, along with Rika and her family. Helmeppo probably didn't believe he would make it, else he wouldn't have taken up the offer. But survive he would. He would show them all. At the present moment though, he wasn't surviving too well. Oh, he was surviving, and even the hunger and thirst was nothing. But the heat was another matter. Stoic as he was, even he was wilting in the unforgiving sun. Mind over matter. The easiest way to endure the torture of the elements was to sleep. Zoro had always been able to sleep almost anywhere and anytime, and it was a skill that served him well now. As he tried to nap, the unbidden image of a girl flashed before him. Kuina. He dreamt of his childhood. Of always trying and never beating his childhood rival. The grueling race to catch up to her skill even as she raced ahead of the adults in the sheltered world of the dojo. Their 2001st duel out in the moonlight. Kuina's despair at her handicap of being a female swordsman. His own disdain at her attitude, and the promise. Promise that one day one of us will be the greatest swordsman in the world. He awoke from his brief slumber to the scorching sun once more. This time, he fancied it was a bit lower in the sky than it had been. The execution ground was still empty. After the first few days, even the curious onlookers had deigned him an uninteresting object and left him alone. The burning sensation of the sun against skin caused his brow to furrow. It reminded him too much of what had happened to Kuina after that night. Zoro. Something's happened to Kuina. She had gone to the storeroom to get her whetstone. Indirectly he felt responsible for what had happened. The duel had been his idea. If he hadn't had insisted on real katana, Kuina would never have had to use hers. It wouldn't have been dulled in the fight, and she wouldn't have felt compelled to sharpen it afterwards. And consequently she would never have had missed her footing on the stairs while carrying a katana in one hand and the lighted oil lamp in the other. Luckily, she had fallen, right, and avoided a broken neck. Unluckily, the dropped oil lamp had shattered and splashed burning oil all over her face. They'd awoken to the sound of her screams in the night. To her credit, she had had the presence of mind not to panic, and even managed to extinguish the flames herself before succumbing to the pain. What she hadn't known then was that the horrifying vision of her immolated visage would be the last thing she would ever see. Excuse me, are you sleeping?" Zoro was awakened from his fitful sleep by the timid voice of a little girl. "Please don't tell me she snuck back here again." "Rika, what are you doing back here? I brought you some rice water." "Didn't I tell you to stay away?" "But, stupid brat, get lost." He was harsh this time, knowing that if she were caught the consequences would be dire. Predictably, her eyes welled up with tears and she haired off without another word. "Sorry, but it's for the best, kid," he muttered to himself as the forlorn little girl disappeared into the maze of roads. Dust swirled in the light breeze and mixed with his sweat, offering some slight relief. The sun, relentlessly cruel, continued shining overhead as the seconds ticked by, agonizingly slow. 7 days. Only 20 more days to go. What would she have thought of him if she had known he had put himself into this predicament? "Zoro, you idiot. How could you be so careless with your life when we both have a dream to fulfill?" Yes. That would probably be the most likely response. Hadn't he said the same thing to her after her accident? And he'd gotten a sharp whack from his master Koshiro for it too. Even years later he could still feel the bruise from the back of the sword. But I will not die here. I made a promise. No, even the flames couldn't break this promise. And neither would the whims and fancies of injustice. The wind blew, and there, on the execution ground, the sun still shone down scorchingly. If there was one thing Zoro hated, it was mosquitoes. And mosquito bites. He'd been injured plenty of times before. Gunshot wounds, broken bones, and more cuts and stab wounds that he cared to remember. After all, it was the occupational hazard of living by the sword and hunting down people who didn't want to die by it. Particularly if the said sword were his. But mosquito bites were irritating. They itched without hurting enough to make it worthwhile. They were like half-hearted attempts at being a real injury, and Zoro despised anyone or anything doing anything half-heartedly. After all, if a man, or woman, took up a calling or a dream, they had better be prepared to give it their all. Else they shouldn't even bother trying. Which was precisely why Helmeppo's attempts at administering a beating to him while he was tied to the stake were annoying him so much. Note that he used the term annoying, and not hurting. He doubted the Helmeppo had ever done anything that remotely resembled physical labor other than bully hapless townspeople and marines. As such, his punches and kicks were ineffectual to say the least. In fact, he'd gotten pats on the head and congratulatory slaps on the back from his dojo mates that had hurt worse than Helmeppo's pathetic efforts. Apparently the labor was taking its toll on Helmeppo, however, for the foppish dandy had decided to take a respite, wincing at his sore knuckles while motioning for his pet marines to take over. Now marines. They knew how to throw a proper punch, Zoro conceded. The sound of knuckles rapping against the wooden door had been steadily continuing for an hour. Kuina. I know you're in there. Zoro had always been known for his stubbornness, and Kuina's accident 4 months ago hadn't changed anything. Well, perhaps that wasn't strictly true. The dojo hadn't been the same thanks to Kuina's absence. Zoro had gone around every day since with a black armband in mourning of the loss of his friend the rival. In the first few days after the incident, everyone had thought that Kuina would die. It certainly would have been a mercy. The flames had consumed the top half of her face, much of her hair, and had left her permanently scarred. And most damaging of all, she had lost the use of her eyes. But she survived and was in the midst of a long and hard recuperation. And although it was said that she had been, as was whispered around the dojo, permanently crippled, no one had yet to lay their eyes on her, as Kuina had not appeared in public since that day. For Zoro, it was as though she had died anyway. Fighting for him now had lost its savor. Nowadays when he fought he only did just enough to win his duels, in contrast to his flamboyant, and over-the-top, victories of the past. He'd even stopped gloating at his progress and showing interest in using more swords than his appendages would allow, which worried the dojo master greatly. Gone was the daily anticipation of the never-ending duel rematches between the two rivals. Gone were the moments of spine-chilling awe when daughter of the dojo master would take on opponents twice her size and thrice her age and win so easily it looked like she did it with her eyes closed. Members of the dojo missed the morning ritual where Zoro would demand a rematch with Kuina and be taken out in one hit. That particular tradition had gone on for so long that each morning seemed incomplete without it. It took them a while to get used to seeing Zoro without the customary welt on the forehead where Kuina would have smacked him with her shinai too. The truth was, without Kuina to aspire to, Zoro was lost, which was why every day found Zoro at Kuina's house, demanding to see the older girl and being awarded with stony silence for his efforts. Yet he persisted, day after day. It wouldn't be Zoro if he gave up, after all. You're pretty stubborn, pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. He was bleeding and bruised all over, but he grinned. He'd won. I told you. I'm going to survive the month and win the bet. Helmeppo looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. It had seemed like a safe bet to him, but Zoro fancied that for the first time, the possibility he was going to lose the bet just filtered into the brain of the dense, foppish Nancy boy. Then again, who would have thought obstinacy of his level could exist? Zoro, just go away. Things had progressed a little. Kuina had actually started responding to Zoro's visits by yelling to be left alone through the screen door. On occasion she would vary it by throwing things out the window, most frequently shoes. They had an uncanny knack of leaving their treads on his forehead after impact. She still disallowed anyone other than her doctor and the immediate family to see her. The dojo grapevine whispered that it was because her face had been scarred so badly and she didn't want anyone to see it. Zoro knew better. Tomboyish Kuina would have cared little on what her looks had been reduced to. In fact, she probably would have welcomed it since it meant she could cross being a housewife off her list of future occupations to be pressured into and focus on being a swordsman. No, what had really plunged her into her pit of black depression was the loss of her sight, and by extension, the loss of her sword skills. After all, how could a blind person fight with a sword? Fight me. You need to start training again. Zoro kept a watchful eye out for his master. The last time Koshiro had caught him saying something like that was the first and only time Zoro had seen his normally serene swordsmaster fly into a rage. Who knew his sensei could be so scary? We promised. You can't just run away from it by falling the stairs. Angry stomping sounds, then a very loud and very angry reply. Shut up. You don't know what it's like, don't you get it, you thick-headed grasshead? I can't see anymore? I can't fight? Go away and leave me alone? That's not good enough a reason, don't use it as an excuse. What would you know, you idiot Zoro? Why don't you try fighting blind? He was silent for a while. Very well, I accept your challenge. What? I'll cut my eyes out and you will do no such thing. He took off the black cloth that was his mourning armband and tied it over his eyes. It worked very nicely as a blindfold. Fine. From now on I'm going to fight every duel blindfolded, until you come out of there and fight me. A somewhat shocked silence, then a derisive snort. You won't last a month. Watch me, you'll see. Zoro smacked himself on the forehead. Another day, another attempted beating. Zoro had long figured out that the unlucky pet marines didn't like Helmeppo either, and only made a big show of striking savagely at him out of fear of their master. Still, even with them pulling their punches, it hurt. Helmeppo was another story. He evidently hadn't learned anything from his prior attempts, and his fists bounced off Zoro's forehead without leaving much of an impact. If anything, Zeus suspected the beating was so pathetic this time because Helmeppo's tender knuckles were hurting. Kuina always did say that he had an exceptionally thick skull. It probably developed from the number of times she had whacked it with her shanai, or shoes. Hey dumbass, his unnerving grin had Helmeppo backing away from his trust self so much it was amusing. I'd say you hit like a girl. Except that would be an insult to the ones I know. Whatever happened next, the look of embarrassed outrage on Helmeppo's face was worth it, Zoro decided. It caused something of a sensation when Zoro started fighting blindfolded. As expected, he started off by ending every day covered with bruises from his dueling bouts, which he lost, but with frightening speed he adapted to fighting without sight, and before long he was holding his own in matches. And soon after, he began winning them. Word got around. Zoro waited expectantly for Kuina to show up and resume her training, but still she did not appear. One morning, he faced off sort of replacement sparring partner since Kuina. The anemic junior was a relative newcomer to the dojo, but had shown great determination to improve. In fact, one might say the bubbly junior had a bit of hero worship for Zoro, and what he lacked in skill he made up for in enthusiasm. As was normal, Zoro took off his blindfold armband, covered his eyes, bowed and started the duel. He knew instantly that something was different. He dueled Saga every day for a month now, and the junior's moves had a whole different flow to them. This was hauntingly familiar, and felt more like. Before he knew it, a familiar strike that somehow evaded his parry scored a hit on his broad forehead. Zoro went down hard in a clatter of shanai. The winner is... Zoro whipped off the blindfold in disbelief. Kuina. She had grown much thinner since her accident. He'd almost feared to see her face, but was surprised to see it wasn't as bad as they had been led to believe. The lower half of her face had escaped unscathed, and she had used a white silk scarf to cover her now useless eyes and the angry red scars that accompanied them. The white blindfolds in way mirrored his own black ones. Her hair was now painfully short, a thrifty blue fuzz just barely covering her scalp, but it was still Kuina. Saga stood in the sidelines, grinning sheepishly. He had swapped with Kuina at the last minute. It was obviously a planned surprise. All this time, and you're still weak, Zoro. The smug grin was back on her face. Everyone waited expectantly. I demand a rematch, Zoro roared, as the dojo erupted in cheers. The days stopped being different now. Blistering sun in the day. Mosquitoes buzzing him to distraction in the night. His stomach had stopped rumbling for a while now. Maybe it had resigned itself to the fact it wouldn't be fed for some time. Sometimes Dandy Boy Helmeppo and his tagalong marines would drop by and say, "Hi," in their own special way. It provided a break from the monotony, if anything. 12 more days to go. It should have been getting easier and easier. He was so close to winning the bet now. Yet it felt like every moment was dragging and he was making progress at the speed of a den mushi crawling. Zoro and Kuina sat outside the dojo, after their morning spar. The silence between them was palpable. For the first time ever, Zoro had won. But Zoro didn't feel elated as he should have. It hadn't been a fair fight. For all the brave words bandied around, it had never been fair since that night Kuina fell down the stairs. "Sensei. You can't allow Zoro to fight Kuina like that. It's not fair." The cries of his dojo mates were indignant. They were drowned out by the angrier yell of a very irate daughter of the dojo master. "I don't want fair." It had been 2 weeks since Kuina had returned to training. Zoro had fought her blindfolded every morning. It was galling that somehow he still managed to lose every time. Kuina had had more time to get used to fighting without seeing, he supposed. She had tried to duel others as well, but no takers. For some reason no one dared to. Whether it was because they felt bad dueling a blind girl, or they feared losing to a blind girl, Zoro couldn't decide. His rival had been especially edgy that morning, and after winning her 2000th and something or other battle she had suddenly exploded at him. "When are you going to stop fooling around and start fighting me seriously, Zoro?" Affronted, Zoro glared back at her. "What are you talking about? I've been fighting you seriously all this time. No need to rub it in." "No you haven't. You still have a blindfold on. You want me to fight you without it? That wouldn't be fair." "I don't want fair. I don't want you fighting me with a handicap, Zoro. If we're going to be the greatest swordsman in the world, none of our opponents are going to care a whit if I'm blind or not." Zoro fingered the blindfold nervously. He would be a laughingstock, a bully if he did what she wanted of him. "Zoro-kun. Please," her voice was almost a whisper. It was the first time she had ever called him that. "Okay." He raised the blindfold into the air, and tied it around his head like a bandana. "I can hear you tying the knots on your blindfold, Zoro." "It's not over my eyes. It's on my head." Zoro patted his new headgear for effect. "This is my promise to you, Kuina. Whenever I wear it on my head like this, you'll know I'm fighting you seriously." Kuina nodded and smiled. "Don't hold back." She was still smiling even after she lost, and they both went to rest under the cool shade of the tree outside the dojo. After all, it had been a good fight. A real fight, with neither side giving an inch. "Hey, Zoro?" He had almost begun to doze off. "Thank you." And that was that. Mosquitoes. At the present, the annoying ones buzzing around his head like a dark, humming cloud were the focus of his ire. If looks could kill, the particular one that had settled on his arm and was happily feeding on his blood would have been dead 10 times over. Someday, Zoro vowed, someday he would so powerful, he would be able to kill with just a look. A tearful yammering from the direction of the wall attracted his attention. 2 heads were peering over the wall and unabashedly staring at him. Well, one of them was, anyway. The other looked so terrified it was bobbing up and down in agitation, reminding him of a coconut set adrift on a choppy ocean. That would be the one belonging to the chubby little bespectacled boy with a shock of hair so pale it could be described as pink. The other head belonged to a lanky youth with a straw hat jammed tightly on his head. Even as Zoro's eyes narrowed, the youth saw that they had his attention and flashed him the biggest ear-to-ear grin he had ever seen. More brats come to ogle at the demon pirate hunter Zoro. Stupid kids probably dared each other to do it. A vein bulged in his forehead as he glared at them in annoyance. It was then when Zoro realized anew, if there was one thing he hated, it was mosquitoes. The lone traveler paused, and looked up at the house where poles upon poles of brightly colored silk fluttered in the breeze. The kimono maker's house by the river was a large but modest affair, strategically placed along the river where there was easy access to water for the washing of the fabrics. Despite its unassuming appearance and remote location on the outskirts of Shimotsuki village, it was revered for the fine kimonos it produced. Indeed, traders visited often for the exquisite garments which found a brisk trade in the Four Blues and even the Grand Line. The kimono maker herself was known simply by the name Ichi, and on this day she stood on the threshold of the house, overseeing the work of her workers and ensuring everything went well. It wasn't long before she sensed the approach of the traveling trader and his empty cart. "Kuina," she called out to her apprentice who was in the sewing room. "Zaito-san is here. Bring along the new kimonos to show him." The young woman carefully put down her needle and the kimono she was working on, and made her way to the storeroom where rows of lacquered boxes were arranged neatly on shelves. Of course she knew very well which kimonos, the new kimonos, referred to. Had she not sewn them herself? The sky blue furicid with a pattern of cirrus clouds and cranes, on the third shelf on the right. The gorgeous homogi which boasted a pattern of orchid flowers, yet with muted colors as not to appear garish as befitting for an older woman. That one was in the lower bottom shelf with the other homogis. And lastly, her favorite, which was stored in the black box on the center shelf, an exquisite furicid made of fine gray watered silk, which shimmered blue in certain lights and grayish black in others. It was like the ocean itself. In fact, she had patterned it such that the entire kimono was a map of the four blue seas, and where the obi would be tied would be the calm belts and the Grand Line. Even as she thought about them, her hands sought them out on the shelves with senses that were not touch, sight, smell or taste. She had never seen the colors of her work, but she knew they were there and every stitch that should have been there was in the correct place. The sense that enabled her to do this was closer to sound. But it was not the different sounds that she listened to, but the different types of silence that let her sense what her eyes could not. And it was for this skill that Kuina had sacrificed the past few years of her life as a kimono maker's apprentice. To the rest of the village it seemed that the tomboyish daughter of Koshiro the dojo master had finally grown up, and had settled into the life of befitting of a young woman with poor prospects of marriage. Given that she was bereft of her sight, it was a wise decision, they said. But Kuina knew better, and bided her time. She had, after all, made a promise. It had been an accepted fact for some time now, that Zoro had surpassed Kuina. In a way it had been painful to witness, mainly because Kuina herself never gave up. It was as if the tables had been turned. Kuina training hard day and night to regain her lost supremacy, Zoro training just as hard to keep ahead. But the timing was ill, because as predicted, Kuina's body was beginning the transition from girl to woman, and the natural loss of coordination and clumsiness that came with it spelled doom for her rivalry with Zoro. This came on top of her already pre-existing handicap of being unable to see, making it nigh impossible for her to compete on an even footing with Zoro, who was already surpassing all records for the dojo. But it had to be said, that in all of the dojo, no one else could come close to them, save Koshiro. But for reasons best known to himself, the dojo master himself never dueled his star students. "My problem is that I can't attack," Kuina confessed one evening as she and Zoro sat on the stairs of the dojo, eating watermelon slices. It had become something of a ritual for them to discuss the day's fight and the new techniques they had each learned. Today's conversation had started with Zoro deciding to name his new double katana slashing move, Nijiri. It was a practical name, Kuina thought, even if it did make her feel a little hungry. Zoro had then asked about the name of her attacks, thereupon which something that should have been obvious from the beginning entered his realization: Kuina never attacked. She always waited for her opponent to attack first and then made a counterattack. "Without my opponent attacking, I can't sense where they are. And you've gotten so good at attacking now, when I let you attack first I'm hard-pressed to defend." For the first time in a long time, Kuina's voice had lost the confidence it once carried. Zoro looked at her narrowly. "You're not thinking of giving up, are you?" Kuina flushed and for a moment she regained her old fire. As if, but like a fire without fuel to burn, it died down again. "All the same, it feels like I'm stuck in a rut and haven't learned anything much in a long time." Her companion stayed silent, somewhat at a loss for words. What could he say, after all? He hadn't faced the same obstacles she had. Anything approaching encouragement would be nothing short of patronizing. The one thing he could do was, "I'm still fighting you with everything you've got, you know. So don't expect me to start holding back on you." I know. For a moment she flashed him a brief smile, and thanks. She sighed heavily, I chose this path as a swordsman. I'm just going to have to suck it up and keep training. Training only works if you're doing the right thing, kuina. Both of them jumped and turned around to see Koshiro at the top of the steps. They hadn't realized that he had been listening in on their conversation. Father, what should I be training then? His spectacles gleamed as he smiled mysteriously. A very special kind of training. Koshiro looked at the two upturned faces, full of curiosity, and smiled even more. Have you ever heard of Ichi, the blind kimono maker? The tea had been poured and the little sweet cakes set out for their visitor. Zaito-san was an old customer of Ichi's and did not rush in to do business, but instead regaled the two women with tales of his travels as he transported merchandise. The pirate hunter Zoro, Ichi-san said as she sipped at her tea. Such an outlandish name the boy has now. Zaito-san nodded at the kimono maker. He has gathered quite a reputation for himself as a bounty hunter. Still, a common bounty hunter. Not quite what I thought that Koshiro's star student would end up being. Kuina tried to ignore the sudden jab at her emotions. It hurt not to be remembered as the star student. But thinking of Zoro only made it worse. She hadn't heard anything of him since he had gone, and he wasn't the type to write. They had both known it then. But that didn't keep her from wondering how far ahead of her he had gotten. It had been almost 2 years since that day he had left the village to become the greatest swordsman in the world. The young man who stood in front of the kimono maker's house had since towered over the kuina in height. Zoro's growth spurt had transformed him, seemingly overnight, from a small scary upstart to tall, scary swordsman. His twin katanas slung at his hip, and he walked with an almost swaggering confidence that only came with youth's limited experience. Since Kuina had taken up the apprenticeship at Ichi-san's, they hadn't sparred. Despite all that, they still met every day after her day's work. Kuina called it slavery, to talk shop. As for the reason why they didn't spar anymore, Ichi had been against the idea. No apprentice of mine is going to be distracted from her work, Ichi-san had solemnly declared. If you want to learn what I have to teach you, you follow my way, or not at all. Kuina had almost walked out then. But a word with her father had convinced her that what Ichi could give her was worth putting aside her dream for a few years to attain, and if apprenticeship need not be permanent anyway. It had been hard. Ichi was not an easy master to please, and had insisted on controlling much of what Kuina was allowed to do, down to the way she dressed. Shirts and shorts were not acceptable wear for a kimono maker's apprentice, the old woman had said. Kuina was a girl and should be dressing like one, and it was a disgrace that a girl should run around with clothes meant for a boy, and so on and so forth. So in the blink of an eye, gone were the old, comfortable, sporty clothes she used to wear, and in came a plethora of long robes and feminine wraps in their stead. It had to be admitted Zoro had done a double take the first time he'd seen her wearing them. You really do look like a girl now, had been his rather untactful pronouncement. You really do look like an absolute idiot, had been Kuina's, after she had pounded him a few lumps on the head in response. Zoro had learned quickly to never tease her regarding this change ever again. So how are you holding up? Well, Ichi-san is strict, and she fusses about all these stupid things. And I can't practice my sword fighting. And I have to do sewing. Kuina complained as she exhibited her fingers, blotchy with red spots where her needle had missed the mark. She insists if I keep doing it I'll be able to sew without having to depend on sight. It's ridiculous. Do you really believe it can be done? Sew without seeing? Kuina looked thoughtful for a while. I don't know, Zoro. When I think about it seems it's impossible, but yet. That old hag can do it. Yes. Ichi-san can do it. And she's blind. Just like me. She walks around this place, no cane, no guides, nothing. Yet she always seems to know where everything is and what exactly is going on. As if she can see. They sat in silence for a while. It almost seemed like old times again, minus the watermelon slices. Kuina, Zoro said at last, I came up here to tell you something. She knew that it had been coming for a while. You're leaving. It was not a question, but a statement. I made a vow to be the greatest swordsman in the world, Zoro explained, as if she needed reminding. And I found out the other day that the greatest swordsman in the world is this guy called Hawkeye's Mahawk. What a name, she mumbled, trying not to sound jealous. He's out there in the Grand Line somewhere, Kuina. I'm going to find him, and I am going to defeat him." Imprisoned by the Marines? Yes. Seems that he ran afoul of Captain Morgan over at the Shelltown Marine Base. They have him there, Zaito-san elaborated further. But what has he done? Kuina could not think of any reason for it. Granted, Zoro could be an idiot sometimes, but to have done something that brought him into such trouble with the Marines. Wasn't being a bounty hunter at least working for the side of the law? Attacked the captain's son apparently. Thought the boy would be smarter than that, Ichi commented. But even as she voiced her disapproval, her sightless eyes were focused on Kuina, as if gauging her response. Does Koshiro know? Not yet. It gets worse. Last I heard that they were planning to execute him. Kuina nearly dropped her teacup. So, you're leaving today? Zoro had come to say goodbye for the last time before he set out on his great journey. Kuina tried to be happy for him. If Zoro hadn't been as obtuse emotionally as he was, he might have noticed her act was not altogether convincing. Are you sure you don't want to come along? It'd be great to have a sparring partner again. The offer was tempting, but Kuina shook her head. I'm only beginning to learn what I needed to from Ichi-san. I'm on the cusp of understanding how she does it. It would be a waste of the past few years if I left now. I understand. The wind blew, and they could hear the flapping of the hung fabrics drying in the sun. In that case, goodbye, Kuina. See you out there. Remember, you promised. As he turned to leave, Kuina watched him go, her heart burning with both regret and envy, and something else. Zoro, wait! She didn't know what possessed her to do it. As she ran into her room and out again, in her arms she carried something wrapped in a white cloth. Wordlessly she handed it to the puzzled Zoro. He unwrapped it to reveal her white katana. The Maitu that was hers to inherit, the Wado Ichimonji. Zoro-kun, take this with you. Zoro's eyes widened. Kuina, this is. Why are you giving this to me? Years of training had honed her perception of the intangible, and she immediately realized the misdirection Zoro's thoughts had taken. It's not because I have feelings or anything like that for you, you idiot, she said with an exasperated whack on Zoro's head. This greatly relieved the moss-headed youth. It wasn't that Zoro wasn't fond of Kuina, but she was more like a sister to him, and if she had suddenly gone all mushy and emotional, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to handle it. It's just that well, I'm afraid, Zoro, Kuina confessed. Sensing his puzzlement, she elaborated further. I'm afraid of becoming too comfortable here. Ichi-san is teaching me a lot. I'm learning a lot. I know this place so well now I don't feel helpless. Everyone accepts who they think I am and, even I. She trailed off, as if disturbed by her own happiness. I am afraid of becoming too contented. Of becoming contented and happy and having that will make me forget that I want to be the greatest swordsman in the world. But why give the katana to me? Are you giving up? No, Kuina struggled for the right words to say. It's hard to explain. It's like this, okay? That katana is my most precious possession. It's been in my family for generations. The only way I can be sure I'm going to take the plunge and go after you when I am ready is if I send my katana ahead with you first. Then I'd have no choice but to force myself to leave this place and go claim it back when the time is right. You made a promise to be the greatest swordsman in the world, Zoro. When you do become the greatest, and I'll just have to find you and defeat you to get that title and get my katana back. And if you don't make it, I'll have to find the person who beat you and get the katana from them and become the greatest swordsman in the world. Either way, if I'm going to fulfill my dream, my katana has to go with you now. Zoro looked at her for a moment, then nodded, and slung the katana at his haramaki along with his other two. I'll take good care of it, he promised, don't take too long. Don't you dare break it, she yelled after him, with a final wave, and he was gone. And, Kuina said softly to herself, if I don't come after you, I don't deserve that katana anyway. She stood there as Zoro walked into the distance, and wondered when she suddenly sensed his presence veering off the road to the harbor and into a rice field. Odd, she muttered to no one in particular, I didn't know there was a shortcut that way. In the distance, Zoro walked blithely along, deep in thought with his new possession in hand. Suddenly he looked up and realized he was in the middle of a vast field with no road in sight. Where did they move the roads again? He grumbled. You are going after him, aren't you? Ichi-san's eyes were narrowed as she stood in the doorway of Kuina's room and listened to her packing. You haven't learned everything I have to teach yet, young lady. You know that. "We made a promise," Kuina said, intent on her packing. "Zoro is like a brother to me. If he lets this keep him from becoming the world's greatest swordsman, it wouldn't be right. And even with what you've learned, you will still have trouble finding your way? It's not the same when it's an unfamiliar place and the sounds are all different. And how are you even going to handle the Marines?" "I will learn to manage. There is no stopping you, is there?" Ichi-san sighed, "But then, there was no stopping me when I left my home island either." The old lady paused, as if lost. Smiled. "I've already arranged for Zaido-san to give you a lift. At least as far as Shelltown. Ichi-sama, make sure you act like a lady. I didn't train you up for nothing, you know." The goodbyes were said, the preparations made. Even father had understood and given his blessing. Zaido-san was very good about it all, and kept asking her if she was comfortable, and made sure that her luggage and the parasol that Ichi-san had insisted she bring with her was safely in the middle of the cart and not to hesitate to tell him if she needed anything. As Kuina sat on the traveler's cart, waiting for Zaido to start, the spirit of adventure was beginning to course through her veins. She was off at last. "You'd better not die before I get there, Zoro," she thought as the cart jolted along the dusty village road. "Or I'm going to be really annoyed." And with that, Kuina, formerly the kimono maker's apprentice and now wandering traveler, faced back for the last time at the house where poles upon poles of brightly colored silk fluttered in the breeze. "I can't die here, I have things due to, a promise to keep." Zoro stared at the strange rubber boy who had somehow, beyond all odds, managed to regain his lost swords and block a hailstorm of bullets meant for him. His attention was focused most of all on Kuina's white katana, the most treasured of all his katana. He had almost resigned to never seeing it again, and facing the ugly consequences when Kuina finally caught up and found out he had lost it. "Well, do you want to die here?" asked the straw-hatted rubber boy as the bullets he had blocked miraculously bounced off him and back at the firing squad. The Marines were still stunned, but could not be counted to remain so for long. He could see some of them drawing their standard-issue cutlasses already. The choice he had to make balanced on the edge of a knife, and finally, he made it. "Are you the child of the devil?" Zoro said with a chilling grin rather reminiscent of a shark. "Forget it. Rather than die here, I'll accept your deal and become a pirate." And with that, a line was crossed. Out in the Four Blues, she would find him, somehow. This was the thought in Kuina's mind as she made her way from the Shelltown Marine Base to the inn by harbor, her brow furrowed with worry. A few of the townspeople turned their heads to glance at the young woman elegantly sashaying her way down the busy streets, with a dazzlingly pretty parasol over her shoulder to shield her from the cruel afternoon sun. "A real lady," they said to themselves. "Look at that fine kimono. You don't see many young girls wearing those nowadays. And look at the way she walks. Small, delicate steps, with her powdered face and eyes glancing demurely downwards." Which was all ineffable rubbish and twaddle, really. Ichi-san had advised her against advertising her handicap to strangers who might seek to take advantage of her, so Kuina had been obliged to, as much as she hated having gunk on her face, paint her face and train her hair as to hide her burn scars and the telltale opaque eyes. She was walking slowly because she was finding it hard going. The marketplace was thronging with people and extremely noisy, making the use of Ichi-san's technique to listen and sense the direction of objects difficult. But she was managing, albeit slowly. The problem now was she had hit a dead end with regards to the location of Roronoa Zoro. She and Zaido-san had arrived in Shelltown just that morning. Her first instinct had been to run to the marine base, find Zoro, and break him out. That idea was quickly overridden by the mental image of Ichi-san's scowl telling her she was an idiot for even thinking so. Indeed, Kuina had since learned the value of discretion in diplomacy. As much as she still disliked it, there was a point to trying the soft approach first. So she pretended to be a curious tourist and wandered over to the execution grounds to gather more information. After the initial scare at finding the execution grounds empty, she had been much relieved and mortified to find her journey had been rather pointless. In fact, according to an amiable young marine recruit who was cheerfully sweeping the grounds, Roronoa Zoro had left town almost a week ago, very much alive. The relief had lasted only as long as until she found out Who Zoro had left Shelltown with. A pirate? With great effort Kuina kept her voice calm as the chubby young recruit rambled on. Once she had initiated conversation, he really was quite a chatterbox. Yeah, there was this great fight about a week ago. Helmeppo was going to back out of his deal to release Zoro if he survived, and Luffy, that's the pirate with the straw hat I mentioned, made a deal with Zoro to get him his swords back if he'd become a member of his crew. Kobe, get back to work. You're supposed to be clearing the grounds, not flirting with young girls with parasols. The Marine officer's appearance had been most unfortunate, because Kobe was thus unable to provide her with any further information, and after a few stammered apologies and a red face, resumed his sweeping. With nothing left to go on, she thanked him and headed back to the inn where Zaito had checked in, even more troubled than when she had arrived. Zoro sneezed. You've been sneezing all morning, commented Usopp. Yeah, what a pain. Zoro had thought the portion of the deck near the cannons of their brand new ship, the Going Merry, would be a great place for a nap, but as it turned, the cannons held an irresistible fascination for the pointy-nosed youth, and Zoro's hints that he wanted to be left alone hadn't quite gotten through. Maybe someone's talking about you, Usopp muttered as he played around with the cannon. Zoro flashed a boastful grin. Probably those cat pirates we saved your village from. He wished he had had a chance to fight Kuro back at Syrup Village. That man had the feel of a challenging swordsman. It would have been a good test of his skill. And a sword on each of his fingers, why hadn't he thought of that? And their kuina was always saying that he, Zoro, was obsessed with having more swords than a person should be able to handle. Imagine if she had been there and met that Kuro guy, her jibes would have caused that uptight fake butler to pop a vein, even if his crazy attack allowed him to move faster than the eye could see. Suddenly, he frowned. Why are you looking at me so scary like for? Yelped Usopp. Zoro ignored him. He had remembered something. Back at the inn, Kuina listened to the innkeeper's little daughter play as she sipped a cup of green tea. Zaito had gone about to do whatever it was that traders did, most likely realize his consignment of fine kimonos and gather new goods to transport to the next town. Kuina, having made her way back on her own without incident, was fuming. It had been all too clear what had happened. Zoro had gotten in trouble, was about to be executed when some unscrupulous pirate on the lookout for more muscle for his crew had seized the opportunity. Blackmailing Zoro into joining his crew like that. That was unfair to say the least. In her mind, the image of this Straw Hat Luffy became to take shape. A sly, conniving pirate relying on his cunning mind and hired muscle to get by. To think that Zoro had fallen into the clutches of such a scoundrel. The worst thing was always the knowledge that it was probably her katana that had induced Zoro into giving in to this pirate. Kuina knew Zoro well enough to know he wouldn't care so much about losing his too common katana, or even his life. But losing the Wado Ichimonji was another matter entirely. So, indirectly, this was her fault. She gritted her teeth. No, she would not accept this. There had to be some way of getting Zoro out from under the yoke of such a dishonorable brigand, and she, Kuina, was going to find it. Of course, that would involve actually finding Zoro. And the problem was, she had no idea where he was now. Beautiful, enthused the clothing storekeeper as Zaito uncovered the lid of the kimono box. Fine silk from Silver Silk Island, West Blue. Hand-stitched by the House of Ichi here in East Blue. This one is in particular, very finely made. Indeed. When I ordered them I didn't realize they'd be this fine. I think I might keep this one for my wife. The merchant confided with a surreptitious glance at Zaito. Haven't been in her best books lately. The old man clucked in sympathy. Matrimony at home is a delicate balance. The trader was about to reply when he suddenly started and stared in amazement into the distance. Puzzled, Zaito turned to look behind at the ocean. What he saw made him take a step back in horror. Is that a Jolly Roger on that ship? I think he'll be closing the shop early today, said the storekeeper nervously. The figure of the traveling merchant was already hurrying away towards the direction of the inn. Kuina was on her third cup of tea when Zaito-san burst into the inn, more terrified than Kuina had ever sensed him to be. Zaito-san, what is it? Pirates, we show harbor quickly. Pirates? The owner of the inn, a woman, looked skeptical. We have a marine base here, surely no pirate would be mad enough to. A resounding crash interrupted her as a young marine crashed through the door, sending wooden splinters flying asunder. He landed hard, and did not get up again. Judging from his pained gasps, He seemed to have suffered some sort of chest injury. How disappointing, an out of place but melodic voice came from outside. I was expecting a bigger challenge than that from the Marines. Kuina stood up, her hand reflexively reaching for her parasol. Zaito drew back from the door, placing himself between her and the door as the owner of the voice strode into the inn as if she owned it. Later, Kuina would reflect, based on the another eyewitness's description of the pirate, on how ridiculous she must have looked. That pirate? She was dressed from head to toe, in black leather of all things. Even the skirt, well, I'd say, dressed, but that's a generous term for it, really. Honestly, her outfit? Just a leather bikini top, that leather skirt, and high-heeled boots. You know the type which goes up to your hips. Must have been really uncomfortable. So I heard. Weapons? Yes, had quite a few, didn't she? Let's see. There was that holster with that pistol. Well, I think it was a flintlock pistol. Anyway, she wore that thing strapped to her left thigh, and she had another on her right shoulder. Oh, and she had pair of those exotic Ji Lian swords too. If you ask me, the extra guns seem rather like overkill, don't you think? Course, I might be a little biased, having seen the business end of them and all. Oh yeah, she was sporting a black headband with artificial cat ears. I have no idea why she was wearing those. I mean, she had this haircut with heavy bangs, and she even tinted them with red streaks, and she had to keep tossing her head to keep her hair out of her eyes. Which were red, by the way. Weird, huh? How old was she? Not too sure myself, but I don't think she could have been older than 15. But Kuina had not had the luxury of a narrator at that very moment, so her first impression of the owner of the voice had been, "What are you two doing? Get me a drink to celebrate my victory." If Kuina could see, she would have thought that the two pirates who followed in her wake were dressed rather oddly. In fact, they would have reminded her of cats. Judging from their hushed whispers, they weren't too fond of the girl either. She could hear their muttered complaints from where she stood. "Can't believe who she thinks she is. What is the captain about, even considering her as first mate?" said the first, whose deep, purry voice and heavy, square build made him reminiscent of a rather fat and scruffy Persian cat. "If you ask me," said the second, whose sharp and mewling voice suggested a Siamese feline counterpart, "Captain Kuro hasn't been the same since he got beaten up by that Straw Hat pirate kid." At that last sentence, Kuina's attention was suddenly piqued. Straw Hat? In an instant her mind started racing. The odds of there being two pirates well known for wearing straw hats were very slim. And this Kuro had fought him recently. If she could find out where, maybe she would be able to get a lead on the whereabouts of Zoro. Before she could react to obtain more information, however, the nightmare girl had whirled around angrily and glared at the offending pirate underling. "I heard that," she snarled. "Don't you think I don't know you're doubting my ability because I'm a girl?" With that last word, she lashed out with her Ji Lian, catching the Siamese cat-like pirate and sending him crashing into the bar counter with great force. "I, Kitty Raven the Hunter, will be the greatest swordswoman who will also be the most beautiful queen of the pirates. More than that overrated Shinshibukai Empress Boa Hancock. And Captain Kuro will fall in love with me and make me his first mate." Other than the illogical run-on career progression of greatest swordsman, queen of the pirates, first mate of some pirate that Kitty seemed to have planned, Kuina couldn't help but wonder who this Captain Kuro was and why in Four Blues did he even have such an annoying admirer. Inwardly Kuina cringed and hoped fervently that she herself had never sounded that conceited in pursuit of her own dream. But deep inside, she knew of one time when she came close to it. It had all started out with an argument shortly after she had arrived at the kimono maker's house. She had had a visit from Zoro as usual, and they had talked about being the greatest swordsman in the world again. As usual. All had been fine until it was time for Zoro to go home and her time help with preparations for dinner. She'd been keeping quiet, doing her part, when out of the blue, Ichi-san had spoken out. "So, you actually believe you can be the world's greatest swordsman?" "Yes, and don't tell me I can't," she had snapped back. She had always been particularly sensitive on that point. In her short lifetime, being surrounded by naysayers and being repeatedly told that she would never be able to realize her dream, had made that phrase something of a taboo for her. Ichi-san had been silent after that, but she could tell that the old woman had heard her retort. It wasn't much of a surprise to her afterwards when Ichi-san spoke again. You do realize that you will still lose out in brute strength to a male swordsman, no matter how hard you train, do you not? She gritted her teeth. She was so tired of hearing this. I'm going to be the world's greatest swordsman, and no one is going to tell me different, she snarled. Yelling at your elders is not how a lady acts, kuina. Now she was being patronizing. What would you know? Kuina ignored the directive not to yell. What would an old kimono woman obsessed about being ladylike know about swordsmanship anyway? Everyone was staring at her now, and she knew it, and it made her angrier than ever. All you do is stay here and wallow away in obscurity. That is enough, Kuina, Ichi-san said quietly. There was a new tone to Ichi-san's voice that Kuina hadn't heard before. It sent a chill down her spine, but some horrible impulse kept her defiant. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. I don't like my apprentices making fools of themselves by talking about things they don't understand as if they did. This really was too much. She knew she was a bad seamstress. She was a bad cook. And she was blind, and despite being over 16 and from a fairly rich family, no boy was ever going to marry her. Not that she cared about such things anyway. But if there was things she did know about, it was swordmanship. And here was some snobby old woman telling her she didn't? Don't tell me I don't understand swordsmanship, you old hag. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. It was a full minute before Ichi-san's voice broke the tense atmosphere. You have a sword, don't you? I believe I saw it when we were throwing away your old clothes. You're not confiscating it. She instinctively moved towards her room. It's my family's mito. A poor swordsman attaches far too much importance to his sword, Ichi said disapprovingly. Nevertheless, go get it and come see me in the drying yard. What are you planning to do with it? Ichi-san's voice sounded irritated. Isn't it obvious, girl? The old woman walked over to her sewing basket. I'm challenging you to a duel. But, stammered the Siamese cat pirate, wincing where the Ji Lian had scored gashes similar to what had happened. I wasn't the one who said that. Whatever, drawled the girl, that'll teach you a lesson for disrespecting me. Where are you going? The second sentence was directed at the other pirate, who despite his bulk, had until then had been doing a rather stealthy job of sneaking away. I was just checking, whimpered the fat cat. Besides, I think Captain Morgan Axefist would be at the Marine base, not in this inn here. Oh, that's right. I had to kill that Morgan guy who got famous from capturing Captain Kuro to become first mate. Captain Kuro said so. You won't find him there. The Marine who had been thrown in had regained consciousness, and despite his injuries, was drawing his cutlass. Court-martial led. Commander Ripper is in charge now. I guess I'll just have to settle for killing him then. That should get me a nice bounty, drawled the pirate. He's a good captain, and I'm not letting you kill him. Kitty laughed. You actually think you can beat me? I won't let you hurt any more people. With that, the Marine charged at the pirate, who contemptuously engaged the injured man. Kuina, quickly, Zaito-san whispered. The innkeeper had already bundled her daughter out of the inn, and Zaito was whispering for her to follow. With a jolt, she realized that the distraction was probably what the Marine had been hoping to accomplish with his otherwise ill-conceived fight with Kitty. But Zaito, she was protesting at leaving the Marine to be killed, but her feet were obediently following Zaito out of the inn until the shot of the flintlock pistol was unexpectedly loud. Kuina cringed, expecting to hear the Marine's dead body hitting the floor, but she could only hear him holding his shoulder where the shot had grazed him. The shot fired by Kitty, who had for some reason switched from her swords, had almost missed him, and gone on to hit the next thing in its path. Zaito-san. She couldn't see the red blood that was rapidly staining the old man's gray and white robe, but she could hear the sound as he slumped to the floor, a victim of the pirate's stray shot. Kuina froze in horror. This couldn't be happening. Not Zaito-san, who was always so kind and considerate. And it was all her fault that they had come here. Red. The memory of the color of blood, in her mind's eye, everything was turning red. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be happening, she had thought, as she lay with her back against the flagged stonework of the drying yard. It was one thing to lose to Zoro in an honorable fight, but to be beaten so decisively with so little effort, it shouldn't have been possible. Despite her handicap, she had the vitality of youth, and years of hard training, and a far superior weapon in the Wado Ichimonji. It was inconceivable that she should be beaten by an equally blind old woman armed with sewing scissors as if she were some bumbling beginner. To reiterate, with a pair of sewing scissors. HMPH. Back in your tomboy outfit again. It makes such an unattractive sound when it moves. Ichi-san had sniffed at her earlier when she had showed up at the drying yard in her exercise clothes and with the Wado Ichimonji under her arm. At least you're not ruining one of your Komen's asterisk. Let's just get on with it, Kuina grumbled in reply. Where's your sword? I can't hear it. Ichi-san smiled thinly. I decided that these were adequate. The snip-snip sound of the implements were too familiar to Kuina's ears for her to not recognize them. You're fighting me with sewing scissors? Actually, they are still overkill, but I'll make it easy for you. If you can cut my kimono, you win the duel. If you lose, you spend dinner time mending everyone's torn clothes. Now you're just insulting me. Kuina gritted her teeth as she took her position and eased the wado from its sheath. Enough delay. Hurry up so I can get back to making dinner, Ichi continued, unruffled. The old woman stood there, the absurd scissors clasped to her chest. At the back of Kuina's mind, she knew there was something unusual with the kimono maker's stance and she should beware. But she was far too angry to think now. The katana flashed in her hand as for once, she attacked first, with more ferocity than she ever remembered having. Cut the kimono? She would cut it into ribbons, she would. She nearly lost her balance as her katana was parried by Ichi's scissors. She barely recovered herself in time to dodge Ichi's counterattack, with scissors. Shaken, Kuina quickly backpedaled and put some distance between the old woman and herself. The shock had dissipated her anger and she was beginning to think. Common sewing scissors should not have been able to stand up to the fire-folded steel blade. In fact, her katana should have just sliced through the inferior metal. And they weren't special scissor blades. She had handled those scissors enough times to know that they were just that. Common scissors for cutting cloth. How were they different when Ichi held them? No brooding, Ichi-san's voice was gleeful as she sprinted forward in a flurry cascade of colored silk. Kuina could hear the fluttering fabric. If she could just cut it with her katana she could win, but the maddening thing was Ichi was on the offensive and all she could do was defend. How could an old woman strike so hard? Even Zoro's blows never had this much force behind them. Overlock onslaught. Ichi was moving so fast, it was as if the world was spinning in a spiraling shower of stabbing scissors, with Kuina herself desperately parrying for dear life as the attack quickened in pace. With a sinking feeling she knew she couldn't keep this up. She had to counter or one of the attacks would slip through. Finally, Ichi-san seemed to tire and Kuina seized her chance. No more holding back. No more mercy, she lunged forward. And the Wado Ichimonji cut through air, striking nothing. Too late. Something concentrated gouged into her from the side with so much force she could hear her ribs crack and the breath forced out of her lungs. She was flying through the air, her katana flying from her grip to noiselessly embed itself into the wall. She landed flat on her back on the flagged stone floor, gasping in pain from the burning sensation from her side. Kuina could hear the clang of a pair of scissors being dropped near her. No dinner for you then, it looks like. The old woman's voice had a ring of amused triumph in it. Ragged gasps were the only replies Kuina could muster. This couldn't be happening. You're swordsman. A true swordsman would have realized it even before they drew their sword, Ichi-san said as she turned to head back into the house. I told you, didn't I? You don't know as much about sword fighting as you think you do. It was beginning to rain. Kuina could feel the faint patter of the droplets as they made contact with her upturned face. Is this the part? She had finally caught her breath enough to speak longer sentences again. Where you tell me a blind girl can never be the world's greatest swordsman? I didn't say that, Ichi's voice sounded slightly amused. But if you go on fighting the way you fight right now, I doubt you ever will. Why? Because you are depending on brute strength and sheer speed to fight, and if you pit yourself against a man of equal skill, you will still lose. Tears streamed down Kuina's cheeks. No, I won't accept it, I won't accept it. Men are stronger than women physically, you should accept it. No, Zoro's face appeared in her mind. She had made a promise. Not even the loss of her sight could induce her to give it up. I will be the world's greatest swordsman one day. I am not giving up. Who is asking you to give up? Ichi-san paused at the doorway, as the low rumble of thunder was accompanied by the heavy drops of an autumn shower. "I'm just trying to get you to understand that as a girl, to achieve your dream, you're going to have to stop trying to fight like that boy. Instead, learn what it is that women are stronger than men and focus on that." And with that, Ichi-san entered the house, leaving a much humbled girl behind in the pouring rain. "Bah, I missed. Wasted my bullets. Never mind, I'll finish you off with my swords." The pirate Kitty the Raven Hunter advanced on the beaten marine, grinning like a mad cat, and was promptly hit in the face with a teacup that had come hurtling across the room. "Who threw that?" The pirate girl, Unignites, screamed in rage. Both the fat cat pirate and his skinny counterpart pointed at figure at the doorway. Kuina stood there, her unseeing eyes somehow focused on the object of her hatred, the outside light giving her the appearance of being incandescent with rage. "It is dishonorable," said Kuina coldly, "for a swordsman to continue fighting against an opponent who has already been beaten. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? You are no swordsman. You're not even a marksman. You're just an ill-mannered wench with too many toys who doesn't really know how to use them and doesn't care a whit about who gets hurt." "And what do I care?" sneered Kitty as she wiped green tea off her face. "What are you going to do, girly girl? Whack me with your umbrella?" Kuina's mouth curved into a grim smile. Something like that. She put the last of her possessions into her bag, and fastened the straps securely. "You shouldn't go unarmed," Ichi-san said. "There are bandits and pirates out there who won't give you any quarter, lady or not, blind or not." "Yes, Ichi-san. I am going to take leave of my father at the dojo first, and I will take one of the dojo swords from there with me." "Don't bother. Take this." With that, Ichi-san proffered the parasol that she carried everywhere with her. The common observer would have thought this strange, but she, Kuina, who had lived with Ichi-san long enough, knew that the parasol was no ordinary umbrella, accepted it reverently. It was very pretty, a pale white with scalloped edges and a pattern of red cherry blossoms and golden birds all over. It looked ordinary enough, except that it had a slightly thicker base than normal, was significantly heavier, and the tasseled handle was slightly different. "Draw it," commanded Ichi. Kuina obeyed. Carefully she drew the blade from the hidden sheath in the umbrella handle. Even as she drew it, she could sense that this was no ordinary sword. Its blade was straight, lacking the curved edge found in katanas. Even without her eyes she could sense there was something different about it. Unlike her wado, which had a perfectly straight and aligned hamon along the cutting edge, this entire blade was a fine mass of dappled bright silver and black-green lines, giving it the effect of rippling water whenever it caught the light. "It may only be a shikomizu, but this sword is on par with many good katana," said Ichi. "It is made of a special damascene steel smelted from ores which used to be found in the Grand Line. Its name is Koyajaku *. I had it for many years when I traveled the world. It is beautiful. Yes, perfect for a woman to wield. That blade is sharp and light, yet strong and supple and discreet. But all the same, take care of it, for the blade is more slender than that of a normal katana's, which means you can't be as rough with it. And keep it hidden when not in use. A lady does not have to advertise her wares." This triggered a sudden snort of laughter from her protégé. "And a lady does not snort, Kuina. I apologize, Ichi-san," Kuina replied demurely. "I am going to cut your face up until it's scarred bad," threatened Kitty, whirling her ji-liens around. "Let's see how your pretty dresses and high and mighty manners help you then." "You're a bit too late for that." Kuina stood where she was, holding Koyajaku, still sheathed, close to her chest. "Forget it, you're not worth my killing. Sham, Butchie, get rid of her." "Why?" "Because if you don't I'll kill you." The two cat pirates seemed to be used to this treatment, for they came towards her, cringing in fear. At least that would be what one who looked at them would have thought. But to someone whose main input from the world came from sound, the cries of fear they gave rang false and phony, and she was ready. And right now, in her anger, she was in no mood for mercy. "It or you." Running Stitch. Kuina darted quickly toward them to avoid their surprise attacks, and then weaved in between the two cats on their approach. As she ran past, she could sense the surprise of their faces, the half moment before both pirates crumpled, hands trying to staunch the flow of red that seemed to have come from nowhere. "How?" The one called Sham gasped as the pain from the cut began to override the shock. The stabbing movement of the needle-like sword flashing in and out of the sheath had been almost too fast to follow. "Bitch!" bellowed Kitty, charging towards her and swinging her flashy twin swords hard in hopes of landing a hit on Kuina. Kuina could feel the pounding of her feet against the wooden floor, the vibration telling her extended senses exactly where her opponent was. With such a clear indication, Kuina knew exactly what to do, and she did it. Now, an experienced swordsman knows that the worst thing about swinging a sword wildly is swinging it wide. When that happens, much time is lost. Recovering one's balance from the first effort and executing a second try quickly is impossible. The other thing is that it leaves one completely open to attack. In addition to this, charging is a terribly bad choice of attack because it takes a while to stop due to the inertia of the body running. It also makes one less observant than normal. A more controlled fighter who wasn't swinging wildly, for example, would not have had their opponent dodge their attack by simply crouching to the side. And a non-charging attacker would certainly not have been unable to stop. And if they had been able to stop, they would not have impaled themselves on the blade that their crouching opponent had simply extended. Kitty lay gasping on the inn floor, her blood staining the weathered wood. "Not fair, I'll kill you." Kuina held the Koyajaku's point an inch away from Kitty's throat. "Don't go putting ideas into my head." Kitty's eyes widened. "Please, my parents ruined my childhood, it's not my fault. I don't see what that has to do with this at all." "Kuina-chan," Zaito's feeble voice broke her out of her reverie. The old man was attempting to sit up from where he had fallen. "Zaito-san, are you hurt badly?" Relief didn't keep her from keeping a wary eye on the pirates, however. "I will live, Kuina. You don't understand. No one understands," Kitty whined. Kuina ignored her and directed her attention to the other two pirates. She had done her best not to hit them at their vital spots, and thanks to that they seemed very much alive. They saw her focus on them, and shrank away at her unseeing gaze. "No one loves me, this Straw Hat boy," Kuina said, raising her voice so it could be heard over Kitty's crying. "Tell me where your Captain Kuro met him." "Captain Kuro, sir, Kuro of 1,000 Plans, one of the most intelligent pirates in the 4 seas, had been sitting brooding in his cabin. Kitty hasn't come back, neither has Sham and Butchie," his subordinate continued. "As expected. But Captain Kuro, sir, that means the Marines beat them." "Good for the Marines. It seems dear old Morgan was that capable after all." "But sir, didn't you send them to kill him?" "That's what I told her, to get rid of her," snarled the bespectacled man. "Honestly, you imbeciles. Did you really think I would want such a useless floozy who shows up out of the blue and demands to be my first mate?" The cat pirate was so scared he could only cower. "Although," said Kuro, grinning as he pushed his slipping glasses back into place with his palm, "Gee god riddance. Don't you love it when everything goes according to plan?" After the fight and things had calmed down, the innkeeper had insisted that she and Zaito stay at the inn to recover. Kuina was impatient to get going, but she knew that Zaito's injuries needed tending to. "Thank you for taking care of Zaito-san." Kuina bowed to the innkeeper. "I'm sorry to have to burden you with my responsibilities." "Don't be ridiculous." The innkeeper refused her effusive thanks. "After what you did about that pirate and all, it's the very least we could do." "Well, you wouldn't happen to know if there is a BP village, is there?" "I'm afraid not. It isn't much of a popular port, but there are many merchant boats going to Logia town, and some will pass by Syrup village. You might be able to convince their captains to drop you off there." "Thank you. I am in your debt." Zaito sat up in bed, his wounded arm and chest covered in bandages. "Are you sure about this, Kuina-chan? I am not quite sure what Ichi-san would say if they knew I let you travel on alone." "I will manage, Zaito-san. Please get well soon." "Kuina-chan, wait a moment." The old man picked up a black lacquered box on his bedside and offered it to the young woman. "It is customary for a young girl to receive this gift when she comes of age on her 20th birthday. I may have missed it by a year or two, but I would like you to have this, nevertheless." It would have been rude to refuse. Kuina accepted the box. It felt familiar. Gently her hands lifted the cover. The whole expanse of the 4 blues opened before her. There, in its box, in all its glory of watered silk and swinging sleeves, was the kimono she had sewn herself, her favorite kimono. They say the great works require the creator to put a little bit of themselves into it to make them come alive, said Zaito. Conversationally, when I saw this kimono, I realized that a certain ambitious young woman had put so much of herself into it. It would be such a shame if such a work were to end up in the hands of someone who would not appreciate it. Zaito-san, this is too expensive a gift, I couldn't. Kuina, whether you realize it or not, you've expressed your own dreams and desires in the making of this kimono. These things, you shouldn't let them go. Explore the different seas and the Grand Line, find Zoro, and become the greatest swordsman in the world. Kuina smiled, and hugged the kimono close to her chest. I understand. Thank you, Zaito, truly. Her hands traveled down the handle of the shikomizu, feeling characters carved into the hilt. Ixora, she muttered aloud. Ichi-san smiled. That was the name I used when I traveled the world, after I left my home island, and before I settled here. There was a pause. Ichi-sama, why didn't you ever go back to your home island? When you go out there, Kuina, you will understand. Her voice still seemed distant. Once you go, you never travel backwards. Kuina left the inn behind and made her way through the streets of Shelltown and to the harbor. People were still talking about the pirate kitty's suicidal attack, most of them praising the Marines for taking care of the menace so quickly. Kuina didn't mind. Drawing attention to herself wasn't in her interest at the moment. Finding a boat was. She paused to listen to the crying sounds of the gulls, the crashing sound of the waves in their incessant dance with the moon. Somewhere out in the Four Blues, she would find Zoro, somehow. After all, she had many things to do and a promise to keep. No matter how long it will take, I will become the world's greatest swordsman. And I will be waiting for you. To the locals of the small port town, the green-haired young man seemed lost. To be more precise, he seemed lost, tired, hungry and horribly afraid of being unarmed, for he was carrying not one, but 3 swords. He was also possibly crazy, especially since he had started talking to himself in his food-deprived dementia. So I'm waiting, the newly graduated dojo student said to himself miserably, and I really wish you'd hurry up and catch up with me. It'd be a lot more fun to have someone who knew where to go and what to do. A loud rumble from his stomach interrupted his monologue. And you'd probably have a better idea on how to get some money to buy a meal once your funds have run out. His stomach agreed enthusiastically with him by emitting another loud growl. So loud in fact, that a passerby nearby jumped about a foot into the air in alarm and started looking around for a ferocious dog that didn't exist. I'm really hungry, Zoro groaned inwardly as he watched another pair of boots walk by. Unlike the others, this pair, dark blue and very ornate and patterned with studs, paused, and then stopped in front of him. That's a nice sword, the owner of the boots said. Zoro looked up to see the speaker, a tall, thin Marine with tawny orange hair and a very prominent chin. He wore a white coat with "Justice" emblazoned upon the back. More importantly, he wore an empty scabbard at his waist. A swordsman apparently bereft of his sword. You seem down on your luck, noted the Marine, scratching his sideburns, but you also seem to have a surplus of swords. My sword broke on me in my last fight with a pirate. I need one for time being and I do dislike our standard issue cutlasses. I'd be happy to help you out by buying that white katana off you. He pointed at the Wado Ichimonji as he said this. Instinctively, his hand closed over Kuina's sword. Mr. Zoro said, his eyes narrowing, I may be broke, but there's not a price you could offer that would make me give up that sword. The Marine did not seem remotely miffed at being rebuffed. Huh? You really are a swordsman, after all? Well, I can respect that. Good luck to you then. With that, he resumed his stroll, but not before flipping Zoro a 50-berry coin. Zoro caught the coin by reflex. Charity, huh? He scowled and was just contemplating throwing it at the back of the Marine's head when his attention was arrested by a small group of pirates who had suddenly appeared, seemingly out of the woodwork of the dock. Captain Diaz, bellowed the leader, brandishing a cutlass at the unarmed man. You sent my brother to impel down. I've come to avenge him. Now that I've caught you outnumbered, prepared to die. While it was a wonder that he managed such a lengthy diatribe while charging at full speed, he never did manage to get much further than that. A green and white figure had streaked through the ranks of the pirates and decimated their onslaught even before it began. Granted, that guy is kind of annoying, "But what kind of dishonorable attacks an unarmed man from the back?" growled Zoro, his sword point at the leader's throat. "A fairly small fry of a pirate," said Captain Diaz, who had been standing in a fighting stance, somewhat unconcerned considering how he had nearly been ambushed. "But you have my thanks. You saved me having to ruin my favorite coat in a fight." It was at this point when Zoro felt the overwhelming urge to throw the 50-berry coin right into his hawk-nosed face. "Oh, that lowlife you've just defeated is Carl S. Berg, and he has a bounty of 10,000 berry, if I recall correctly. It's not that much, but if you drop him off at your local East Blue Marine outpost, I'm sure you could think of things to do with that reward money. Happy bounty hunting. Ta-ra." And with a wave, the puffy Marine continued on his way, leaving Zoro with his pile of bodies. "Bounty hunting, eh?" Zoro muttered to himself while hefting his new bounty onto his shoulder. "Might as well as long as I'll be able to eat. All I'll have to do is find that Marine outpost. That should be easy." Overhead, the gulls were laughing. Right? Back to the present. She felt sicker than she had ever been in her life. Kuina imagined the small boat bobbing up and down on the waves, churning her insides along with it. Once in a while it would give an extra hard smack against the waves and splash foamy seawater everywhere, as if to make things a little more interesting for her. If you could call listening to Pilot talking about the shoal of fish gleefully following the boat in hopes of getting more of her regurgitated lunch interesting, that is. "I would have thought that being blind, seasickness wouldn't affect you as much," the young Marine sailing the small fishing boat said cheerily. "My pops used to say that people got seasick 'cause they couldn't match up what they were seeing to what they were feeling, but I guess you just proved him wrong." Considering that he was swathed in bandages, he was being unreasonably cheerful, she thought resentfully. In fact, it rather annoyed her at the moment. He didn't even have the decency to join her in on her seasickness. Young Marines who get cut up by cruel cat-themed pirates had no business being chirpy and cheerful, even if they did seem to survive with no ill effects. The spirit of misery-loving company tends to override more rational thinking when one is seasick. Though in all honesty, Kuina had never intended to head out to Syrup Village to find Zoro in the company of a Marine. It had just happened. She had gone searching for a merchant boat that would pass by Syrup Village. She hadn't been successful. Most of them weren't keen on wasting voyage time to stop at Syrup Village where no one seemed to have any reason to go to. Not even for a cargo of syrup, it seemed. Kuina had spent her second morning at Shelltown toying with the idea of buying a boat and sailing it herself. Upon the consideration of several points, which were: A. She was blind, obviously, and probably would be hopeless at navigation. B. She had no idea in which direction Syrup Village was. C. Even if she did, the only thing she knew about sailing a boat was that you needed to have sails to do that. That was about it. D. She couldn't afford a boat anyway. While she had brought a substantial sum with her in the form of the money she had saved while working for Ichi-san, she doubted she would have enough to buy more than a used dinghy and have any left over for her travels. She came to the conclusion that overall, it was a bad idea. That point, E. She was extremely prone to seasickness, was not a factor in this decision was mainly because at that time, she was not aware she was prone to this deficiency as she had never sailed in a boat that was in water deeper than a pond, and ponds had considerably smaller waves than the freaking East Blue. Kuina had almost decided to swallow her pride and go back to ask Zaito-san for help when someone had called out to her in street. "Hey, Miss Kimono. Wait up." It had turned out to be young Marine who had been defeated by the Kitty Raven something or other pirate at the inn. In truth, she had been surprised to hear his voice, a slightly more familiar one amongst all the strange voices in Shelltown. Her impression of him the day before had been that he wouldn't be getting out of the infirmary for quite a while. As it was, she could hear the soft rasp of the linen bandages against his uniform, and his odd gait suggested while he appeared to be up and about, his injuries hadn't simply disappeared overnight. The name's Piers, the Marine had introduced himself breathlessly when he had caught up to her on the street. "Seaman. First class. Piers. Just got promoted." Kuina raised a painted-on eyebrow. Her real eyebrows had never really grown back properly after her burn accident. Running up to someone you didn't know and starting to talk about your recent promotion produced that kind of reaction. Nice to meet you. You're the Marine who you saved." "Yeah," Piers said. "Honestly, I didn't mean to take credit for what you did." The medics said I hit my head too hard when I told them it was the girl in the kimono who beat that pirate, and they said I ought to take a couple of weeks off, and then I thought I should at least thank you, and then I." Here he paused to catch his breath. "I mean, they were saying like, that girl doesn't have a sword, and killer deadly in a kimono, haha, are you serious? Anyway, I searched everywhere to find you, and the innkeeper said that you were looking for a boat to Syrup Village, and so here I am." Feeling a bit breathless herself after Pierre's massive run-on introduction, Kuina couldn't help but wonder why he had taken so much trouble to find her just to thank her. "So you're most welcome, Pierre-san." There was a pause of awkward silence before Kuina remembered her manners. "I am called Kuina." Pierre smiled and bowed deeply. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Kuina." Another awkward pause followed. "And is there anything else I can do for you, Pierre-san?" The marine face palmed. Now haven't I gone and left out the whole point? "Actually, it's kind of more like what I can do for you, Miss Kuina," Piers elaborated as he launched into another run-on explanation. "You see, before first became a marine I was kind of like a fishman. I mean, not like a fishman like those you find underwater, but a fisherman. Well, actually it was my pops who was the fisherman, but I had to help him out, so I guess that kind of makes me a fisherman too. Except I thought I'd rather be a heroic marine and all that. Except I'm not as good at fighting as I am at sailing, if you get my drift. Anyway, after my pops died I guess he left me his boat. I still keep it for my off-duty days. And since I've got a few weeks off in a boat, and I'm a pretty fair hand at handling a boat." "Piers-san is offering to bring me to Syrup Village." Kuina breathed incredulously, hardly believing what was being handed to her out of the blue and on a silver platter to boot. "There and anywhere you want to go," said Piers, beaming, "as long as I got leave." Seaman Piers, Kuina couldn't help but soup-beat to his infectious positivity. "I like you already." An all-consuming obsession is something that people devoid of ambition are unable to understand. In fact, words do a very poor job of describing the sensation of being utterly possessed with a notion or an ideal, where everything else comes secondary. For Roronoa Zoro, it drove him to train, and when he wasn't training he was always still thinking of ways he could train to improve his swordsmanship. An obsession is a very single-minded thing. Once in a while the mind also expands to other topics which are frequently associated with the obsession. Sometimes, all of this focuses into a single symbolic goal. And for Zoro, the symbol of his achievement was finding and beating Hawkeye's Mihawk. It irritated him that the barrier to this achievement so far wasn't even in fighting Mihawk, but finding him. It really should not have been so hard, surely. But no, he'd spent years trying to track down one single man, and always to no avail. So, when he'd heard that Hawkeye was to be found at the Bharati, it seemed as though all those years of search were finally drawing to an end. He would find Mihawk, and he would defeat him. So he'd thought, but as fate would have it, it had turned out to be a false lead. For one moment he'd despaired, and even had the mental image of Kuina finally catching up with him and snidely commenting, "You couldn't find him? What kind of stupid excuse is that?" Of course, at the present, his effort to find Mihawk was being compounded by the fact they had been shipjacked. By their own navigator, no less. "She's the only one I want as my navigator," Luffy was petulantly saying about the absconded Nami. Why was his life always revolving around the pursuit of someone? First Kuina, then Mihawk, and then whatever pirate that he needed to get a bounty for and eat. And to add insult to injury, now he had to go and get that witch of a redhead who also happened to be a thief and hijacker. Perhaps fate had ordained he would always be doomed to pursue someone relentlessly and fail. Captain Don Krieg, a panicked pirate, was screaming, "That's the man who destroyed our ships. He only used his sword to cut their ships? That's impossible." It was a pity he couldn't stick around for the fun. As much fun as watching a lone swordsman take out an army of pirates was. He had a ship to retrieve and a wench of a dark hair, huge black sword, and piercing gold eyes like those of a hawk. Suddenly, Zoro's heart started thundering again. Is he? In all the hubbub, Red-Leg Zeph, the chef of the Bharati, seemed to be the only one unawed by the new arrival. That's because he is Hawkeye's, the greatest swordsman in the world. That didn't turn out so well, Piers sighed. Kuina shook her head. It was perplexing. They'd arrived at Syrup Village, dry land, at last, and she'd gone to the village to ask about the Kuro pirates' previous attack. only to be met with puzzled silence and a few giggles from the village kids. "Pirate attack?" the woman manning village restaurant had echoed, with a tremble in her voice that suggested she was having trouble keeping a straight face. "I'm sorry, but there hasn't been any pirate attack here for as long as I can remember. As you can see, our village is peaceful." "I see," Kuina tried not to look too dismayed. "There used to be a long-nosed kid who would go around lying to people about pirates attacking though," an old man having his lunch spoke up. "That's probably where you heard the rumor from." The old man then turned to the restaurateur and asked, "What happened to that Usopp boy anyway?" "I heard he went off adventuring," she giggled, although it could be one of his tall tales again. The three kids in the corner burst into laughter at this. Kuina decided she had had enough, thanked the woman, and made her exit. "What am I going to do?" she said into Pierre's sympathetic ear, her head cupped in her hands as they both sat on a rock by the beach where they had anchored his little fishing boat. "I'm never going to be able to find him now." "Sure you will," assured Piers, who was a rather comforting kind of guy. "We'll just have to find another clue, that's all. I can help." Kuina flashed him a wan smile. It was quite difficult to stay depressed in the presence of the perky marine. "So why are you looking for this straw hat pirate anyway?" Piers asked. "It's not really him I'm after." Kuina lifted her head to face the sun. A normal person would be blinded by that action of looking into the sun, but for her at least, it had little consequence. "It's someone that he has with him whom I want to find." "Oh, is he your boy Fr?" "No he is not," Kuina interrupted quickly, a hint of irritation in her voice, closer to a brother. "Oh," repeated Piers, "and he suddenly decided to go off pirating with Straw Hat Luffy?" "Zoro wouldn't be a pirate. He's an honorable swordsman. He wouldn't pirate, well he wouldn't." She could hear Piers' astonished silence at her vehement objection. "Sorry," Kuina apologized, "I didn't mean to yell at Piers-san. It's just, thinking about it and feeling helpless to stop it makes me upset." "It's not that," Piers sputtered once he had recovered from his astonishment. "But your brother is the pirate hunter Zoro." "He's not I saw him while in Shelltown. Well actually I had to fight him, but I didn't really. He and Straw Hat Luffy beat everyone and Captain Morgan and left together for." Piers-san met Zoro? This time, Kuina was at a complete loss for words. 30 minutes later. "I can't believe Piers-san met Zoro and I didn't know," Kuina groused. "Well you never mentioned his name. And at that time I was working under that runt Helmeppo and had to," Piers explained as he guided the boat into the current stream. "In fact I had to do some pretty stuff." For a moment he looked down. "There was this once when I had to throw this cute little girl who was bringing Zoro food over the execution ground wall. That wasn't very nice of Piers-san." Kuina tried not to sound accusing. "I know. I'm still ashamed of myself for not standing up to him." The sails flapped as they caught the wind and propelled the little boat merrily along. "Zoro did, stopped Helmeppo bullying that little girl. That's why he ended up in trouble with the Marines." Kuina couldn't help but feel a little rush of pride at hearing this. "Anyway, I remember that Straw Hat Luffy mentioning that he wanted to sail the Grand Line. Isn't that an entire ocean? I don't see how that helps." "Yes, it does. You see, if you want to get to the Grand Line from the East Blue, there's one sure place where every ship heading there is almost guaranteed to stop." Piers' voice was triumphant. Logia Town. This was it. The calm before the storm, the silence before chaos. All the corny descriptives ran through his head as he stared down the man he had spent years trying to find. "I have been searching for you for a very long time, Hawkeye's Mihawk." The man did not seem impressed. "And what exactly do you desire of me?" "You're bored, right? What do you say to a duel? No holding back now." He pulled the bandana over his head and secured it. Behind him he could hear the astonished murmurs of the pirates as they realized his identity. "It's Roronoa Zoro, of the Santoryu, greatest swordsman in East Blue." Weakling. The dissonance in the stream of praise and the sudden put down was jarring. "Greater swordsman than you have not dared to face me, because they know where their power stands in relation to mine even before they draw their sword." Zoro held his gaze stonily. "You're strong-willed," Mihawk continued. "You have a brave heart. Or a foolish mind." Despite himself, he suddenly had a flashback of Kuina whacking him on the forehead amidst cries of, "Idiot. Promise, one day either you or I will become the world's greatest swordsman." He had promised. "My lifelong dream has been to defeat you," Zoro said as he drew Wado and prepared to hold it with his mouth, as a promise to my best friend. He grinned and prepared for the fight of his life. Kuina kept a firm grip on Koyajaku. The opened parasol kept her from being roasted in the scorching sun. But at the same time the stiff breeze threatened to whip the shikomizu right out of her hands. She had a feeling Ichi-san would not be amused to hear that she had lost her precious heirloom in such a careless manner if that happened. Finally she tired of the battle against the wind and reluctantly closed the parasol with a sigh. Accepting her punishment from the sun, she had on a thick layer of powder anyway. She probably wouldn't burn. Probably. It would take them almost a week's sailing to get to Logia Town. Normally it would have taken less time, but because Pier's boat was a small, open boat with one square sail, they wouldn't be able to take the fastest routes as they had to stick closer to shore. Initially, Kuina hadn't quite understood what the difference was, since to her a boat was just a boat. But it was mostly due to her ignorance of sailing, and Piers soon explained to her that small boats like his were all right for sailing in good weather, but if they were to be hit by a sudden squall, they would likely be driven off course and die of exposure before they could make their way back to land. Providing, of course, that they didn't capsize and drown in the first place. The cheery way with which he dispensed such grim information didn't exactly make her feel any better about her own inexperience and her earlier near-suicidal plans, but she was glad of having such a knowledgeable guide with her. "There is one shortcut we could take," Piers said during a period when the wind had decided to take a break and they were becalmed. Kuina had the parasol up again, and judging from the rustling of papers, Piers must have been looking at a map. She recalled it was something new. As long as she had been sailing with Piers, he seemed to have done every bit of navigation by memory. "I know the seas here like the back of my hand, but I've never had reason to sail this route before. The normal route from Syrup Village is to follow the shore west all the way to the Red Line and then sail south towards the Grand Line to reach Logia Town. But there's a trick that my pops used to get to Logia Town quickly whenever he had an extra special catch. The secret blue current." Kuina wasn't sure she understood, but she let Piers carry on. "It's a hidden sea current that starts due south of Syrup Village, and sweeps westwards until the headland after the Bay of Gosa. It'll carry us faster than the wind at this time of the year. It's a bit risky if we hit bad weather at any point before we reach the Bay of Gosa, but we'd still be close enough to run to shore if needed, and it'll save us at least 2 days of sailing." That part she understood. "I would be more than amenable to taking that risk then, Piers-san." Inwardly, she vowed no little risk would put her off getting to Logia Town and cutting Zoro off before he disappeared into the Grand Line. But she knew if it came to it, she would have to follow him into that most dangerous of oceans, because she had left her life behind when she chose this path. "You are just someone who has never seen the real world." Mihawk's words echoed in his head. As blades whirled through the air, his rage was gradually building. Mihawk was holding that absurd little knife, and he couldn't even win against that toy at this range? The bloody damn real world shouldn't be so bloody damn different. This was not what he had trained his whole life for. "It must be nice to have been born a boy. I want to be greatest swordsman in the world, but..." He had every single advantage. "Shut up. You don't know what it's like. Don't you get it, you thick-headed grasshead? I can't see anymore? I can't fight?" Mihawk's parry and counter thrust sent him stumbling backwards and falling. In any other fight, his opponent would have taken the chance and finished him off, but Mihawk just courteously stood there, waiting for him to get back up. He wasn't even taking him seriously. Well, if he wasn't going to keep his guard up, Zoro was going to take advantage of it. He had no intention of losing to Mihawk. Not with that toy. Not like this. Toragari. The tiger was hunting, but then crimson lightning struck it in mid-leap. Zoro felt the blade snake past his sword and drive into his chest. In a disembodied kind of way he looked down, sword still raised above his head. The point of the little knife was poised over his heart. If he had moved just an inch closer, it would have been the end. Slowly, he lowered his swords. "Why do you not step back? Do you wish for this knife to pierce your heart?" "I'm not sure myself." His breathing was slowing now, labored. But there was a terrible calmness in him. He was no longer enraged. "I left my life behind when I chose to become the greatest swordsman in the world. If I take a single step back, I'd feel like I'd broken my promise, and I'd never be able to face her again. That is called losing," Mihawk stated flatly. That is why I can't step back, countered Zoro. If I have to back down, I'd rather die first. Around the Bharati, everyone held their collective breath at this display of defiance. For what seemed like an eternity, Mihawk's eyes fixed upon Zoro, as if trying to decide if he were a fool or simply fatalistic. Then with a wet splorch, Mihawk pulled the knife out of his chest. The sudden rush of blood on the removal of the weapon didn't even register. It was as if he had lost all capacity for pain in the excitement of the moment. "Tell me your name, boy," said Mihawk slowly, as he unsheathed the black sword from his back. "My name is Rorin." Zoro knew. Mihawk was serious, and so was he. "So, just how far south is this current?" Pierre's little boat bobbed up and down and Kuina was beginning to feel the familiar waves of nausea that preluded her seasickness again. They were far out to sea and sound of the waves had changed. Unlike the gritty-sounding breakers near the shore, the waves out in the deep sounded hollow, and to her sensitive ears, seemed to leave an echo with each swell. She had tried to explain this difference in sound to Piers, who had agreed that shore waves sounded different from deep waves, but had also expressed surprise that Kuina had noticed the difference. "Most people," said Piers, "only noticed that the color of the water changed from light turquoise to a dark, almost black blue the deeper it got." Since she couldn't quite confirm this herself, she assumed she was going to have to take his word for it. "My pops said it should start around here somewhere. It's a pity that we're in such a hurry," Piers mused as he guided the boat. "Further down south you can just see this famous ship restaurant called the Bharati. I've always wanted to go there and try the food with the air, friend. But I never could quite afford it until I got my promotion." Kuina wasn't quite sure if she had heard the almost silent girl muttered between air and friend, but she decided that things they were would be far less complicated if she just treated it as if she hadn't. "Eh, what is it, Piers-san? There's a boat over there in the distance near the Bharati." She could feel the boat rock as Piers leaned over the side to get a better look. There was a moment of silence. "Miss Kuina, you will not believe this, but there is a ship over there with a pirate flag. The pirate flag is a skull with a straw hat." Kuina half stood up so suddenly that she nearly upset the boat. "Straw hat? Here? Do you see Zoro?" "It's kinda hard to see. There's a wreck of a huge ship next to it, and there's another small boat nearby it. It's really small, and it's got black sails, and green candles." Piers sounded rather confused at the last description. Even as he spoke, there was a sound that even with the distance, rang across the water. If Kuina didn't know better, she would have said that it sounded like a house being sliced in half. "Piers-san, what's going on now?" The young marine's voice was shaking. "Miss Kuina, a man just sliced a whole ship up. I think I recognize him. He's one of the Shichibukai." "What's a Shichibukai?" "One of the world government's warlords." Piers squinted. "He's carrying a black sword. It's Hawkeye's Mihawk." "The greatest swordsman in the world? How did you know?" "Piers-san, I will answer that question later, but now please, we need to get over to the Bharati. Now, because..." Sanzen Sakai. The voice, hauntingly familiar, echoed across the water. "Well, that's why," she concluded lamely as Piers frantically steered the boat towards the Bharati. He had spent his whole life chasing, always chasing. "I've trained my whole life to be like you." Kuina had always been his ideal, but just as he thought he could catch up to her, the old her had disappeared, and gone on to a different level he could never hope to follow. The current Kuina was not the same, and though it did not make him any less fond of her, no, perhaps he was more fond of her this way, but it was never that same, and his dream of triumphantly beating her in a fair fight died, only to be replaced with the dream of beating Mihawk. And now that he had finally found Mihawk only to be brushed aside as easily as a giant swats a little stinging gnat, that dream too was dying. Dying, and sinking into the depths of darkness like his battered body. He was marginally conscious of his blood, a bright green contrail in the blue light of the ocean, marking his descent into the depths. In his mind's eye he saw Kuina. He could hear her voice as she stood outside the kimono maker's house years ago. "If you don't make it, I'll have to find the person who beat you and get the katana from them and become the greatest swordsman in the world." Shit. He was dying, and it really shouldn't have bothered him anymore what he held in his death grip. All the same, he couldn't help thinking about how very pissed off Kuina was going to be when she went to avenge him and found out that he had thoughtlessly carried the Wado Ichimonji with him to his watery grave. I guess I screwed up in more ways than one, he thought as the blackness finally swallowed him and he knew no more. Kuina. She did not reply. Her tears streaked down her face, making ghastly inroads into her makeup. Miss Kuina. He had lost. And she had heard the entire battle taking place, while being too far away to be of any consequence. Wounds from the back are a swordsman's shame. She had heard, over the sound of salt water slapping against ship hull, against creaking bulwark and broken keel, the faint but familiar rasp of a katana being sheathed. And the final slash from Mihawk's blade. Then dull splash of the ocean swallowing the one they called the pirate hunter Zoro. Zoro, you idiot! Her best friend and brother in arms. After that she could remember little what she had done, perhaps it was the shock. Miss Kuina. Piers was shaking her. Or perhaps he was just holding her by the shoulders and she was trembling violently. Why was she crying? She should have been more battle-hardened than this. She had previously cut down her opponents knowing full well they might not survive. She had even enjoyed it, and what Hawkeye's Mihawk had done to Zoro was exactly what she would have done. It was what Zoro would have done to his opponent. Why was it any different when someone else was the recipient? Why in the Four Blues was she suddenly so weak? Mihawk is coming this way. What do we do? Piers, for all his inherent unflappability, was in full panic mode now. Why was he asking her what to do? Perhaps witnessing Zoro, whose skill he held in high regard, being cut down as easily as a swath of rice stalks at harvest had something to do with it. She could hear the sound of wind filling a sail. She could almost smell the candles burning. She didn't need Piers to tell her where Mihawk was. She could sense him and his aura coming across the water. And he radiated such concentrated will and power that it dwarfed the memory of the same Ichi-san had displayed back years ago. For the first time in her life, she was terrified down to the core of her being. But she had promised. If you don't make it, I'll have to find the person who beat you and get the katana from them and become the greatest swordsman in the world. Her knuckles whitened as they tightened her grip on Koyajaku's handle and she unwedged the hibaki of the shikomizu from its sheath. She had promised to fight Zoro's vanquisher. She just hadn't imagined it would happen so soon. It was like a newly appointed apprentice being told to put together a full wedding kimono from scratch. Piers had been terrified into a frozen silence. She could not blame him. Mihawk's boat was very near them now. She wondered if he could hear her wildly hammering heart. She wondered if he too felt the prickly chill down his spine. Then Mihawk stopped. He was close enough she could hear his breath over the silence of the waves. She could hear him, and though she could not see him, she could feel his keen eyes taking them in. It must have been an odd sight. A young marine wrapped in bandages and a young girl in a kimono, with a painted face. I recognized that sword. His voice was like the edge of a blade, sharp, precise, forceful. Tell me, how is Ixora doing these days? Part of her was surprised that he knew Ichi-san, even if she tried not to show it. In this case, the ladylike control that Ichi-san had drilled into her served her well. Ixora-sama is doing very well, thank you, she replied demurely as her fears suddenly disappeared, to be replaced by cool poise that she didn't even know she had. It was as if another had taken over. Are you too, seeking to avenge that young swordsman? True to his name, Hawkeye's had seen through her facade and had immediately recognized her as a swordsman. I made a vow, a promise to my best friend. Deja vu, Mihawk sighed. Girl, I have been commissioned to fight pirates, not marines or those in company of marines. His words stung, his disdain barely disguised. And I have no interest in fighting crippled swordsmen. But that does not mean I will not hesitate to cut you down should you draw your blade on me. So choose wisely. Choose between becoming the world's greatest swordsman or death. If she drew her sword, he would chop the boat in half, and in such close quarters, she doubted that the damage would be limited to her alone. At the very least, Piers would be collateral. But she had promised. She could sense the extent of his power even without crossing blades with him. She knew, without a doubt, that he was far beyond her level, just as he had been far beyond Zoro's. But she had promised. There was nothing to it but to do it. Her face set, she prepared to draw the blade and face her opponent, or die trying just like what Zoro would have done. Unbidden, the voice of Ichi-san filled her head. You're going to have to stop trying to fight like that boy. But she had promised. Yet still, her hand remained frozen, and she did not draw her sword. Senpai, can you hear us? Senpai? The cries were so irritating. They sounded like Johnny in the midst of his panic attacks. Zoro, he's alive. Oh. He was lying in the bottom of the small boat, his legs dangling ungracefully, and rather painfully, over the side. It really hurt to move, or focus his eyes. Don't die, senpai. Yosaku was freaking out now. Why was he even alive? He'd lost. I will never lose. He almost thought he could hear Kuina's voice. It was exactly the sort of thing she would have said. Geez. Even now, what even she says echoes in my head even years later, he reflected as he closed his eyes again, triggering another round of panic from Yosaku. It is too soon for you to die. Roronoa Zoro, Mihawk's voice thundered, interrupting his inner reflection. Learn more about the world. Refine your skills and become strong enough to challenge me again. He still had the Kuina's sword in a death grip. With a start, he realized he had never let it go, even when he had been unconscious. No matter how long it will take, Mihawk's voice was further away now. The boat he was on was moving. I will be the world's greatest swordsman and I will be waiting for you. No, it wasn't time to let go. Not yet. He raised the Kuina's sword and found his voice. Well? Mihawk's voice was impatient as he turned back to face Kuina. You said you had no interest in fighting me, Kuina ventured, despite her relief at hearing Zoro's voice. He was alive. No, I do not, said Mihawk as his boat passed hers. On impulse, she said it. Is it because I'm blind, or is it because I'm a girl? It was a stupid thing to have said, and Ichi-san would not have approved. So, you still desire to fight me even now? Zoro had not backed down. He had given all he had in his battle with Mihawk, and he had lost, badly. If his spirit hadn't impressed Mihawk, he would have been dead. Simple as that. But perhaps because of his novelty value, Mihawk let him live. I will not make any exceptions for your gender nor your disability. This would have been what Zoro would have done, but she was not Zoro. And she did not have to do things his way. Her grip on Koyajaku's hilt relaxed. No, not yet. She let go and let her arm hang limply to the side. Well, you do have a thinking head on your shoulders at least. Mihawk noted, in a voice both approving and yet disappointed. Do you have a name? I am called Kuina. I see. You probably have some skill as well, but spirit. Not so much. Still, you may not be totally without hope. What happened next was confusing to her, but later she would realize that she had acted purely on instinct at that moment. Down! Kuina yelled as she pulled Piers down to the bottom of the boat. Something keen and almost tangible swooped past above them. There was a silence, then a splintering creaking sound as the cleanly bisected wood of the sailboat's modest mast gave way. The cut-in-half mast crashed into the ocean, unceremoniously dropping the canvas sail on them both. It took them a moment struggling to get out from under it. The indignity of the whole thing nearly had Kuina breaking into some very unladylike profanities, but Piers, who was after all still a sailor, kindly filled in for her in this regard. Yes, in time. Quite possible. Mihawk continued speaking, as if he hadn't just performed a feat that would have a normal man soiling his pants. He cleared his throat before speaking again. Kimono Kuina, in answer to your question. Mihawk's tone, though still haughty, was sincere. Only a fool cuts down a young sakura tree before it has had a chance to blossom. She could hear him put his sword away before the sounds of his boat disappeared into the sounds of the ocean and she presumed, out of sight. Piers was still describing the departure of that particular warlord of the sea in terms that were less than flattering. Apparently his fear of the Shichibukai did not apply if they crossed the line and damaged his generations passed down family fishing boat. How did he cut down the mast? Did he throw his sword at us? She asked dazedly in between the marine's subsiding expletives. Piers caught himself. Know that basket case, just swooshed his huge black sword around like he was just waving, you know? And next thing I knew you'd tackled me. Thanks by the way. And I nearly got a haircut and my sailboat got turned into a rowboat and my sail's a fishnet net without holes. He cut the boat without using his blade. Kuina wondered in awe. Other than how he did that. If he didn't intend to kill us, why did he even? Then in a sudden rush of insight, she understood. "You're an arrogant show-off, hawk eyes," she muttered to herself. "But did you do that for the reason I think you did?" "Piers-san, what about Zoro's boat? Can we still catch up with them?" Piers sounded like he was shaking his head as he surveyed. "I'm afraid not without a working mast, Miss Kuina. We've been swept up in the hidden current we were aiming for. We could row to get out of it, but we're going to in a bit of trouble being stuck out here without a mast. I don't think the Bharati will be able to help us. They look like they're in the middle of a battle there." True to his words, and judging by the sound, a full-scale war seemed to be breaking out between the crew of the Bharati and the pirates from the wrecked ship. Part of her wanted to join in the battle, to make up for her decision not to fight Mihawk, but she knew it was too dangerous for Piers, and in any case, they had no good reason to be getting involved. "I can still see Zoro's boat," Piers said, "but we are going to lose sight of them soon. Miss Kuina." She had a decision to make. "It's all right. We'll catch them at Logatown," Kuina said calmly. As the hidden current drew their crippled boat away, she would find him again. After all, she had promised. "No matter how long it will take, I will become the world's greatest swordsman. And I will be waiting for you."